If any one of these legends I'm about to tell you is true, well, I just hope it's the first one, because the further we go, the darker it gets. While you may scoff at the names of these poor souls, I'd strongly suggest you hold your tongue until you know all of the supposed origins. This may actually be one of the most tragic or the most horrific legends I've told.
Do you think that Melon Heads exist today?
I hope not, and if they do, I hope we don't see any out here. I would tell you, if you want to come through Kirtland and see them, I would not stop and want to take a selfie with them.
There are 3 different places the Melon Heads are said to be, and while nobody knows which state is their true home, I'll be telling you of each legend, so in the off chance that you find yourself face to face with one of these Melon Heads, you can make a better decision than if you had gone out exploring without any information. If you live in Michigan, then you're going to want to pay attention. The Melon Heads are said to reside near a place known as Felt Mansion, although they've also been reportedly seen in the southern woods of Ottawa County. There are variations to each of the legends, as with each other state, so take each one of them with a grain of salt. These Melon Heads were originally children with a condition known as hydrocephalus. It primarily afflicts older adults and infants, and what it actually is an excess amount of fluid in the cavities deep within the brain. If too much fluid builds up, it can put a lot of pressure on the person, causing brain damage. Nowadays, we know that the way to treat this is with a tube or a shunt that needs to be inserted surgically. This will drain the fluid and more or less solve the problem. It's genetically inherited, so you're not going to get it by eating a bug or something weird. But anyway, these Melon Heads were originally little kids that had hydrocephalus and lived at what was called the Junction Insane Asylum near the Felt Mansion. During their time there, they were said to be under the care of a man known as Dr. Crow. And while they were there, they were repeatedly and viciously abused by the doctor. Eventually, the little kids just couldn't stand to take the torture anymore, and are said to have organized a plan to take the doctor's life. And they were successful. However, because they had no place to hide him, they did the only thing that the little ones could have thought of. They cut the doctor up into small bits and pieces and hid parts of him all over the Felt Mansion. And after this, they obviously couldn't have stayed there, so they retreated into the forest and woods in an attempt to become the masters of their own lives. But in doing so, they turned feral and stayed in the woods around the asylum. In this version, it doesn't say whether or not they survived, but if they're being seen around the area still, maybe they did. While it's easy to look at this situation and be terrified or disgusted with their behavior, I personally take a more empathetic approach to it. If there were little kids suffering at the hands of a mad doctor, what would you have them do? Be tortured until their lights were extinguished, or do what they needed to do to survive? The Allegan County Historical Society, of course, claims that the asylum never existed, but instead, that this location was the site of a prison. Although I think we're all aware that sometimes history is changed within the textbooks of which we are taught in order to keep the peace. After all, this legend has been part of the folklore of this area for decades. But if this truly is just a story, maybe the real origin of the Melon Heads lies within Ohio. When it comes to the Melon Head legend in Ohio, it's more associated with the Cleveland suburb of Kirtland inside of Lake County. Again, the Melon Heads were believed to be orphaned and abandoned children and were under the watch of a man known as Dr. Crow. This doctor's name tends to also vary from C-R-O to K-R-O-H-E, and in some variations he's even called Dr. Melon Head. However, in this version, the doctor is said to have performed unholy experiments on these children, which causes them to grow their large heads. The things he did cause their heads to grow, their hair to fall out, and in some situations, the kids even had misshapen bodies. Some people say that the kids were already suffering from hydrocephalus, and that Dr. Crow just put even more fluids into their brains. And in a similar fashion to the first story, the children took the life of the mad doctor and burned their place of suffering to the ground. They would retreat into the forest, where it's said they fed on newborn babies. This next piece of information I just add with a warning. If you go out to this place, it is of your own volition. I'm not responsible for your choices. So, if you like to take a chance at spotting one of these melon heads, then you can venture out along Wigner Road in Kirtland. It's in Gogu County. I'd probably go out armed if I were you. Chances are you won't see anything, but what if you did? What would you do? It's believed that this supposed Dr. Crow never really existed, but again, just because we don't see this man in the records of the town doesn't mean he wasn't real. In fact, his name, Dr. Crow, may just be what he wanted to be called himself. And if he was real, he probably wasn't a doctor as much as he was a monster. When it comes to the legend of the Melon Heads in Connecticut, the state seems to be littered with folklore about them all over the place. Litchfield County, Fairfield County, New Haven County, and many other smaller communities. But for this one, we're going to focus on the legend in Fairfield County. It's also said to be the location of an asylum, but in this case, an asylum for the criminally insane. This place supposedly burned down in the fall of 1960 and resulted in the death of every single one of the staff members and almost all of the patients. After the authorities managed to search through the ash and debris, they found that somewhere around 15 or so of them were missing. It's assumed that they had gone out into the woods to hide and survive, and in this case, attempt to thrive. In this story, the Melon Head's appearance is due to the repeated inbreeding and then cannibalism in order to survive the frigid winters. You could almost compare it to the characters in the Wrong Turn series. However, still, the condition of hydrocephalus is said to be present in these unstable individuals due to their repeated inbreeding with one another. And you may just think this is all just some creepy story made to scare campers in the woods at night, but I'm sorry to say, something like this was documented as happening already. Not the doctor, but the strange family living out in the woods. The Bean clan was a large family that were extremely violent and deformed due to repeated inbreeding. They would attack those that passed by and would have gone much longer without them being caught had a princess with formal fencing training hadn't escaped them and reported them. They were all executed, but it just goes to show, this stuff really does happen. So maybe the Melon Heads are still out there. Who knows? It's a mystery. And you know, where mystery lies, adventure awaits. If you like what I do and you want to help support me, then the best way to do that is by joining the community on Patreon. I post when I can and it goes a long way in supporting the channel. If you're not into that though, then just check out this video YouTube seems to think you'll love, and I'll see you there.